This is the Tree of Life, Season 24, Chapter 6. In this episode, we will be breaking down infinite recursion into two phases, pre-negation and post-negation. We will be talking about how the arrow of time, during each phase, is impacted by the context length. To start out, in the last two episodes, we talked about how the rate of change in consensus is reflected by the context length in any analog substitutionary structure. This context length describes the distance between the two substitutionary impulses in that structure, and the corresponding distance between the two sets corresponding to the digital structures on either side of a sequential substitution event. The idea was that when the distance between those two contextually dialectical impulses is greater or equal to 2 steps, the result is infinite recursion. To explain what I mean by this, imagine that you negate an impulse, which corresponds to a thought. Most people in the average day are held to a single step of degeneration between two substitutionary impulses. That is, let's say you think, I'm not going to watch a show on Netflix. The next thought might be, I'm going to go for a walk. Thus, the contextual negation degenerates into an affirmational impulse. This is a single step within a dialectical process. 2 steps might be, I'm not going to watch a show on Netflix. I'm not going for a walk, it's raining out. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Thus, in this context, there are 2 dialectical steps before affirmation. Now, each step in the dialectical degeneration permits further negation. Each dialectical step takes time. This is the first phase of a substitution event. The time which precedes each negation flows regularly with the arrow of time. After negation, the convoluted path, which represents the affirmation of the negated impulse, occurs at a multiple of the number of dialectical steps. So, for example, in the single-step example, the post-negation convoluted path occurs at a rate of time which is twice the arrow of time pre-negation. For the 2-step negation, it occurs at 4 times the rate. But each negation leads to further convoluted paths, because it permits more negation. Thus, for the 2-step negation, this leads to 4 potential convoluted paths, and so on and so forth. The total time which passes to path parsimony, that is, the top path, is simply the sum of each pre-negation path. But because the arrow of time flows faster as you descend post-negation, the total time in infinite recursion is limited only by weak phase linking as it runs into a bodily rhythm or cycle. Further, each convoluted path represents a distinct flow of time, because each analog structure has a distinct context length. Since we observed that the rate of change in consensus is determined by the context length, then as the length increases through these nested paths, we see a corresponding impact on the arrow of time post-negation. Now, hierarchical natural law establishes the context length by weak phase linking following reverse substitution. We can see that it may be that those higher in the hierarchy experience longer context lengths, and hence a faster arrow of time. This means, for example, that the supraspatial edges, which describe supraspatial interactions between subjects during substitution events, may be a consequence of distinct rates of change represented by their interaction with consensus. In effect, you can imagine that instead of a world comprised of a unitary experience of time, the world is comprised of shells, or plates, with a distinct experience of the arrow of time. These plates can touch, periodically, they can interact with each other, but they remain irrevocably anchored to their own perception of time. They are also hierarchical. Thus, the higher in the hierarchy determine the context length and the lower, the relative rate by which they alter consensus. That's the end of the podcast for today.